about 75% of, and I'm sure the stat probably came up earlier today, 75% of the apps that are downloaded are not even opened once, right? And the cohort after about a month is less than 20%, right? Even though of the ones that are opened. So there's an exponential decay in terms of people continuing to use the app. So we as a human race, now our attention span is less than that of goldfishes. Those lovely, orange colored fishes that you see, right? In movies like Finding Nemo, I have a young child, so I see that a lot. So therefore, your ability to engage a user who's very, very distracted and is being bombarded with thousands of messages every day, not to mention notifications, emails, other things, is very, very difficult. So how do you kind of operate in this, in this environment? So I've looked at 3 different models. And I'll cover one of them in more detail. So the first one, which I'm going to look into a little bit more in detail, is Hooked by Nir Eyal. This is a book that he wrote recently, earlier this year in 2014. Another one is called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. This is about how to make ideas stick, right? I won't have time to cover this one, in a 15-minute talk. And the last one, which is one of the most classic texts around influence, is a book by Robert Cialdini called Influence for Psychology of Persuasion, right? So each of them have a nice model in which you can try to model your app or your solution and the framework and try to look into that. So I'll dive right into the Hooked model. This is the one slide summary from that whole book in a sense, again by Nir Eyal. Like I said, the fundamental thing it starts with is to say, what is that underlying trigger? What is that underlying emotional need? What is that human need? I mean, if you think of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, human beings have a lot of needs, right? Physical, sociological, and goes all the way up to, self-actualization. So what is that need? What is that trigger? All of you are sitting here, in a mobile conference. This is probably the last but one session of the day. You're probably bored, right? What mobile app comes to mind? This is a question for the audience. What mobile app comes to mind when you're bored? Just shout out. Quora. Wow, that's an all. So I need to talk to you later. Okay. What else? Facebook. Okay. What was that? WhatsApp. Okay. Yeah. So the user's mindset and where that trigger is, depending on what app you have, is very important. If you're a booking app, if you're maybe you need to get a ride home. So like the lady was speaking from Ola Cab. Maybe you want to pick up your Ola app and book your taxi ride home or whatever. So the trigger is really important, and there are a lot of different things that the mobile phone enables for the first time that you didn't have before. Even if you have a trigger, do you make it very, very easily actionable, right? So I'm a big fan of Google now. We'll talk a little bit about it later, even though it's sort of work in progress. But nonetheless, if I just realize like, oh, it's 4:30 or 4:45 now, and I probably need to get a ride home, if at that time suddenly it says, oh, this is where you live and this is where you need to go, and here's a active notification to go book a cab, would you like to do it? And this one's available or that one's not. Taxi for sure is available or Ola is not or whatever it is. That makes it much more easier for a user to take action, right? I think somebody earlier, one of the earlier speakers talked about this notion of invisible apps. I think the designer from FreeCharge. So the more you make it less about, oh, it's my app, it's screen time, it's actual time inside the app. It's more of, am I helping a user accomplish some action, right? That's really important. Nir talks a lot about this model of variable reward. It's used a lot in gaming. I'm not a gamer, but nonetheless, this notion of these sudden aha moments, these delightful moments where you're not expecting some kind of a return, but you get something, right? It's a little unique, it's a little different. So therefore, human beings, the way they behave is, if you have a consistent action with a consistent reward, works very well for utilitarian things. Most of us are not doing necessarily utilitarian things. Therefore, you need some engagement through basically varying the reward, right? So therefore, you put in a little more effort. And lastly, you get to godlike status if you can get a user to invest into an app, right? So the classic example from a US company, not mobile, is Netflix, which is a movie streaming site. It's widely cited, so I cite it here, which is if a user goes, so Netflix is a movie recommendation, it started as a movie recommendation site. Now, of course, it does streaming, and now they're beginning to do their own content and whatnot. If a user went to Netflix and added 7 movies, the lifetime retention on that user was 99%. If you just went and rated 7 movies, right, then you're highly unlikely to ever go to any other movie recommendation service, right? So they, of course, they figured this out after a lot of empirical evidence. And of course, having a fantastic recommendation engine with 7 things. So imagine if you're if you are trying to build a recommendation engine or your Zomato or your some discovery service, I know there were quite a few that presented here today, Munich and others, if you can get the user to invest some amount of time after the basic trigger, action, motivation, variable results, then you can own that user for right. Remember the cohort, the 1 month cohort and the 6 month cohorts decline exponentially, right? A 6 month cohort is less than 20%, maybe even 10% of the users that did open the app. So it's actually 20% of 25. So it's only 5% people that are left after 6 months for any app, by and large. These are some of the factors that affect engagement. So the mobile phone, I think we talked about Tinder. You look at so many other examples of people that are doing mobile-first solutions where they're exploiting location, immediacy, engagement, etc. So you absolutely biometric sensors. There's a lot of interesting ideas around Aadhaar. So you've actually got to use the context of the user, time of day. So the maximum number of searches, for example, on Google, and this is a little dated now. I used to work there many years ago. Used to happen at 6:30 in the morning or around 10 o'clock in the evening, between 8 and 10 p.m. That was really weird, and of course there was a peak around lunchtime as well because people were away from their office computers. This is again, I'm talking about Google India, not necessarily globally, although the behavior is probably similar. So if, could your app be responsive and have a different behavior at 6:30 in the morning, right? Most of us know where we are at that time, but so you have to think about the user's context. Emotions we talked a little bit about already. Why should the user act, right? I don't think it's good enough, and I hate a ton of apps, and I won't name them here, especially in the news area, including in India, where you're just bombarded by notifications, right? So maybe I can mention Times of India because I'm pretty sure they're not here today. I love Times of India as a newspaper. I subscribe to it. I read I use their app. But you get 16,000 notifications a day, right? In the middle of a cricket match, it's like every over they're sending you a score as a notification. That isn't really going to make me very motivated to do anything except uninstall the app, right? So my personal use case for maximum uninstallations is irrelevant notifications where there is no need for me to do an action. And finally, the loyalty of the stickiness comes from repeatedly using the user's trust. There's a news app called Umano, again a US app where there's an audio news component. I love that because they may not even do a notification once in 2 or 3 days. Sometimes they may do an email notification because it's only relevant to saying, hey, last 3 days we noticed you didn't use the Umano app. These are 3 beautiful articles you missed based on the 240 that you already listened to. And it's a guaranteed click-through, guaranteed action, guaranteed re-engagement for me. So here are some techniques as you think about your own mobile app in terms of how to kind of break it down a little bit more. The very first thing is the time to the first delightful moment, which is just the startup. And this is a disaster, I would say, by and large. I have about 386 apps on my phone, a couple of phones and 2 battery chargers to carry, that from the time of installing an app to getting some ROI, in my opinion, should be single-digit seconds of time. I mean, post the install and all that, right? The download and whatnot. So the onboarding flow is really, really important. I'll talk about one of the really popular apps from travel that does this really well. Notifications, CRM, engagement through the triggers in Neer's model. That's pretty important too. And each of these has metrics to go with it, right? So you can have the time to first action for your onboarding flow or the mobile CRM. Deep linking and chat. I think there was, I see him back there, the gentleman from WeChat. WeChat has a beautiful API. Unfortunately, WhatsApp and some of these others don't. But chat as a distribution platform can be very interesting. Some of you said, when you're bored, what do? Go up to WhatsApp, right? You open it up. Now, what if I could get a WhatsApp notification to book a cab for the ride home? Again, to stick with the, the cab example. Distribution is very, very hard in mobile. Everybody knows how hard it is to get to 100,000 downloads or 500,000 downloads or whatever. Aha moments, right? So this is very important. Mobile is it's unlike anything else, right? Mobile is a very, very personal device, right? It's an extension of yourself. So you need to have fun with it, right? It has to be a little exciting. It has to be a little, delightful in a moment. It's like going to a movie. If it was just monotonously, of one pitch, even if it was a very good, compelling story, you'd be bored out of your mind, right? So how do you get users to have some aha moments? Again, a fantastic, on the website, a company like Zynga, if you played some of their games, their metric is number of aha moments, and they actually have a numerator and a denominator. Total number of moments served, total number of aha moments, some notion of click-through in the sense of a broader audience, right? So hospitality industry does the same. So there's a hotel called Westin where they've designed for an aha moment when you go sit on your bed, finally after checking in, getting your room key, etc., etc. So designing for that. And lastly, of course, this whole notion of sharing, social spreading, and virality. So let's look at a few quick examples. So onboarding, I'm not even sure if you can see this properly in the back. So Airbnb is this company from travel which has a phenomenal onboarding experience. And I mean, just to point it out, and again, it's not rocket science, but they're saying, I will make it brain dead simple for you to go and see the first property that is near you. Use Google Connect, use Facebook, use sign in if you want to, but you just go right in. The example from your left hand side is the Google Inbox app. When it was launched, they had a ton of things like coach marks and workflows to just get you going. And it wasn't more than 30 seconds to onboard a user. If you just looked at Inbox by itself, if you remember the early days of Facebook and when they redid the news feed and when they did like and so forth, most people were psyched out of their minds, right? Because they were like, what is this? What am I supposed to do with this? But on mobile, you have the luxury of being able to do a very quick tour or a very quick set of snapshots or a very quick onboarding flow. So you should have onboarding metrics, like I said earlier. Notifications, this is Quora. I think that there was somebody here who said Quora when they are bored, which is awesome. I'm actually a big Quora fan, but I don't go to Quora when I'm bored. I go to other things. So Quora is phenomenal at engagement. It's one of the highest engagement apps as well as websites, again, for this kind of demographic that we have here. So they do notifications, they do questions people have asked you, they do questions that people have upvoted. So they use all these social signals, right, to be able to figure out what is it that is relevant to what you have done or people are asking you to do or what have you, right? So everyone does notification. You get 50,000 notifications, you're not going to do anything. But if somebody says, oh, such and such, upvoted an answer that you had, or, such and such, followed you, now it's very personal to me, right? So now I'm like, okay, who's this person, or why did they upvote that answer, or let me go write another answer because maybe somebody else will go do that. LinkedIn, of course, I think does a phenomenal job of engagement, almost converting from a social graph for hiring into a content network, right? So they're using content as a strategy for engagement. Deep linking, again, this is a US example, but very relevant. How many of you have your own mobile app? Everyone? How many people are awake? Okay, no. How many have enabled deep linking on Google search? It is one of the best opportunities for engagement, right? And it's pretty open and pretty widely accessible. And also with Google Now, which I mentioned earlier, we'll look at a screenshot. So you can basically take, in this example, I think it's hotels or rooms for rent in New York. It could be hotels in Goa, it could be cabs in Bellandur, it doesn't really matter. So you can basically index in-app content on Google through the natural organic search. And what you'll see over there is, in that the second result is from Airbnb. It'll actually open a deep link into your app, right? So Google has now opened this, I think, a couple of months ago for everyone. I think chat is a great example where you can do this. I think WeChat is already open in India, but I think Hike is also open or semi-open or whatever. I mean, so you have to get blessed by their developer programs. But finding other triggers in the context of the user's interaction to be able to get them into the deep linked story is really, really important, because there's no way you're going to get just regular downloads, installs, open engagement, right? So you have to find all these other ways, whether it's social sharing, whether it's content, whether it's deep linking, whether it's chat, to be able to invoke the user back into your app. Aha moments. I think Walnut presented here today. I was just thinking through some Indian apps where I've actually had an aha moment, and I really like this thing that they had done, so Walnut is this personal expense app, finance app that these guys presented earlier. So these are my expenses, and I had a dinner or something at Bond South in Koramangala a few weeks ago, and basically it just visualized all of that on a map, right? So where all you've spent your money, where you get these transactions from those establishments, right? This is the one on the left. And for me, it was an aha moment. So interesting, like I never visualized my expenses in a geographical basis, on a geolocation basis. The other one, of course, is the cricket test match. For those of you who are cricket fans, this is the score from yesterday's match. So they had to send the slides in early. But India were, I think, for 23 runs short and 9 wickets in hand today. Australia, of course, went all out. So, and then there's stock. So Google Now is phenomenal because it's not trying to get you to open an app. There is no Google Now app per se, right? It is basically a personalized set of recommendations where they're using machine learning to be able to modify the behavior. So it's an aha moment when you're not even thinking about it. And of course, they have access to a lot more data, so it's easy to say. But I have a Google Calendar entry for the MobileSparks event, and suddenly it says, oh, time to drive there, right? Because it's going to take you an hour at this time of day to go over there. Or cricket match, I didn't even know there was a match on, and suddenly it says India is 311 for 4, right? And so forth. So designing for a few aha moments consciously, right? Again, depending on what your app is. Again, if your app is recharge, like the gentleman from Freecharge said, maybe you don't care, right? You just want come, recharge, get out, right? Like done. But in many other cases, you need to think about some of these aha moments. Content sharing and virality. So this is the real-time location feature out of WeChat, where this is, I think, from Shanghai when I was traveling there earlier this year. And I had to meet someone, and of course, I don't speak any Chinese or Mandarin. And I was using public transportation to get around. So there's a very nice feature where you basically, who you are trying to meet, you get on a real-time location chat with them, where there's not really any chat happening except the sharing of location. And you start basically navigating towards the same thing. The virality of this was enormous because every single feature that I use, every single person I met in China, I would basically just, everyone's on WeChat, of course, in China, unlike here perhaps. So I would just turn this on, and that has a natural viral spread. The other one, of course, is Secret, right? How many people on Secret? Come on, you can admit it, it's okay. Secret has this ultimate voyeuristic, kind of, feel to it, right? So because it's an anonymous network, of course, there's a lot of crap that happens there as well. But nonetheless, there's a lot of interesting things saying, for the one on the bottom, there's 1,700 people that have liked this, X number of people have shared it, X number of people have, whatever. So there is this inherent human emotion that they're appealing to from an engagement perspective. Of course, it's a certain class of content, certain class of users. So obviously, in a 15-minute talk, it's hard to cover all the examples. But again, you can think of examples where you can appeal to some fundamental kind of human emotion, right? Sort of look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So net, focus on the user. So literally, like I said at the beginning of my talk, start well before you get to your app or your design or your engagement metrics or your cohort analysis, right? Start with, what is the context of the user? Where are they at? What time of day is it, right? What have they done? What is that state, okay? Work through what would their trigger be? What would their, emotional state be? Why would they be motivated to take an action, right? Ask yourself that question. Saying, why would I, let's say, a fashion app, right? There's quite a few fashion companies that presented here today. Saying, do I just get up in the morning and say, I want to look at new clothes? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? And so when is that time when you're most interested to say, now I'm a little bored, or, I have to go to a party for Christmas or New Year's Eve, so I want to start looking. So you have to figure that out. And of course, you obviously measure everything. Be very clear on if it's a utilitarian thing, meaning is it a need or a want, right? So the classic painkiller versus a vitamin. Especially for mobile, think of the physical world reaction, right? What would they do equivalently in the physical world? And then can they do it 10x better in the virtual world? Can they do it 10x better on the mobile device? So I think that is something that you can do. Finally, you can engineer triggers, whether they are implicit or explicit. Whether it's a notification, an email, something else, somebody pinging them on chat, a little blurb getting shared somewhere, and eventually you have to basically say, hey, does it solve the user's problem, right? If it doesn't solve the user's problem, you'll get away with the early spurt, but then your engagement data will decline quite exponentially. So that's pretty much what I had. This is the other dark side of engagement. This, of course, I think is from, if I'm not mistaken, from Australia. Of course, China, there's a couple of streets where this has happened. Don't make your product so engaging. I know all of us would die to be in that place where people are actually tripping and falling and breaking their legs because the product is so engaging. So, so that's what I have.